today we're really going to be talking about the future of finance within the industry, especially for our early stage startups. We've got a really good, strong turnout of today and for the rest of the week. So we've got a couple of questions for you, Ben, to sort of talk through sort of what the landscape looks like and the projections that are coming up and the trends that are sort of coming in the next year or so as we round off 2024.
Sounds great.
But as we look to 2025, like how would you sort of assess in your sort of position as leader of life sciences at Mercury, one of the leading financial online institutions for early stage startups, especially around what the current landscape is of early stage funding and key differences you're seeing right now in early stage funding and what we're going to be expecting to see at the turn of the year.
Thanks, Jerry, and really excited for the Breakthrough Challenge later today. So a little bit about Mercury and as to why we're one of the right people to try to answer that question is we are a banking and financial workflow platform really focused on supporting founders from the earliest stages of ideation all the way up through massive scale, both with their banking needs, but also kind of the general financial management of an organization as it goes from a founder with an idea and no money to hundreds of employees, millions of dollars in revenue, and managing significantly more complicated financial workflows. So we really see a lot of these transactions as they come through because they land in our accounts. Oftentimes they even come from our accounts because we also support venture capital funds. This has been 2024 has been a fascinating year as someone who just studies financial markets and has been a founder and an investor multiple times over. The dynamics are really interesting. And I was just reviewing Carta's most recent data for Q3, and it's really indicative of a little bit of the past and I think where we're going in the future. So the novel finding was over the last 6 months, you've probably all been hearing relatively rosy, upward-looking, optimistic projections for how the investment market is going. It's starting to become unstuck. There's more deals getting done than there were in 2023. That is true. Unless you look at seed and Series A. We're actually going to be flat for 2024 as to 2023. And that actually makes sense because so much of the additional liquidity that came into the market, so many of the additional deals that got done in 2024 were bridge rounds. They were flat rounds. Or they were the later stage deals getting unstuck, which may not have technically been a bridge or might not technically been flat, but weren't at the rather optimistic valuations we were seeing in 2020 to 2022. So a lot of the capital that came back into the market in 2024 came in Series A and later. A lot of that was because those companies had already taken institutional investment and they were not allowed to die. They were allowed to get leaner, they were allowed to trim, they were allowed to pivot, but they were not yet allowed to die. Some were allowed, but not as many. Not as many as the pre-seed, seed, Series A companies who can say, hey, you weren't able to raise the money you needed, get tighter, get better, figure it out, and get to your Series A, which one of the previous speakers mentioned that Series A companies now are so much stronger than they were in 2020 to 2022 because they had to go through the tough years of late 22 through early 24. So that's what 2024 has actually looked like. And as somebody who I've been a founder in the raising capital from day zero, we now support more than 10,000 companies in healthcare and life sciences. The majority of them are pre-Series A, and that additional liquidity that we talk about now, they're not feeling that. A lot of that additional capital is coming from accelerators, which one of the previous speakers mentioned is an incredible source of capital to go to. But they're just having to bootstrap longer and be much more creative, get to revenue much faster. But I'm also seeing venture funds that focus on pre-seed, seed, and Series A close new funds this quarter. Two of my favorite funds and fund managers in San Francisco had closes this month. So there is liquidity coming to fund managers who need to deploy it in the asset class that has been flat. So I would expect seed and Series A to start to really ramp up in 25, maybe in a similar way that post Series A did in 24.
All right, well, I think that's definitely good to know. There's obviously a lot of emerging technologies and developments within technologies right now, especially in AI, blockchain, biotechnology, etc. And you, of course, work and service a lot of the founders in these startups, as well as the investors, of course. We work very closely with them as well. Are investors sort of leaning towards sort of the more tech-driven startups, and how is that sort of influencing those kind of funding strategy going into next year?
Yeah, so there's a couple of really interesting threads in that. One is the say the general acceptance of what used to be called tech bio. The firm Artist Ventures really started to evangelize that a couple of years ago, and now it's become a relatively standard perception that. And one of the previous presentations had a really beautiful graph, it may have been Prem, about the use of artificial intelligence in drug development and the rapid rise in candidates coming into the FDA in which those companies were native AI businesses. It used to be a novel thing to use AI. We used to just call it computational biology, which is something that an investor previously pointed out to me. No, we've actually been doing this for quite a long time. And yeah, the math there's been some new breakthroughs on math, a lot of new breakthroughs on infrastructure and breakthroughs on data availability and curation that really unlocked the use of computational biology or artificial intelligence in the development of these candidates. So I think investors in 2024 were investing in AI drug discovery platforms. Now they're just investing in drug discovery platforms, and if they're not using AI, why not? And now the founders have to answer the question of what are the algorithms you're using? What is that infrastructure that you're using? What are the data that give you a unique, unfair advantage in the market as to why your candidate's going to be better than the one next door? So I'm definitely finding that to be true, and investors have gotten much smarter on how to invest in AI because they're not investing in AI. They're investing in a drug development company who has to ship a candidate.
Yeah.
On the other side of things, in the more services and software-oriented world, I'm seeing a much more honest representation of healthcare companies, not as pure software plays. It used to be that software was eating the world and then data was eating the world. Turns out software and data cannot do a blood draw. You can build a Uber for blood draws or an Uber for phlebotomy. I've seen 500 of those. But they all need a phlebotomist to show up at your house or to show up somewhere and actually do the blood draw. And then you have to move that vial physically from that place to a testing facility, and from that testing facility you have to get the outcome. And the outcome can actually be just digitally distributed. One of the previous speakers talked about anything that moves, digitize it. We can digitize blood, and what that means is moving testing to the edge. So, but you still need that phlebotomist at the end. So I'm seeing a lot more companies be a little bit more honest that their software solution or their data solution requires services. And investors have gotten much smarter in that because I think a lot of people, frankly, lost their shirts investing in telehealth because everybody thought that everything could be digitized, and they just really ignored the fact that there were services aspects of these businesses that were required. So that's another thread that I'm seeing. And what that means when you launch a business with an assumption that it's going to be a services play, you get new investors, you get private equity, you get lenders, because usually you're able to move revenue much sooner. And the valuation multiples are different, and the return multiples are different. So by being a little bit healthier in the establishment of those businesses very early, and those expectations very early, it allows actually more different types of investors to come in, which means that these companies oftentimes have a higher likelihood of real success.
No, absolutely. And you make some really good points about the whole sort of digitizing piece of you can't digitize everything.
Yeah.
And we should move on microphone. And in terms of you talk about the way that traditional sort of venture funding is sort of progressing and moving towards the next year. We've obviously seen a lot of different types of alternative funding in the last sort of recent years, sort of like crowdfunding and venture debt and corporate VCs and so forth. How do you see that sort of evolving going into next year, and is anything sort of leaning away from sort of the traditional sort of venture capital roles and processes?
I don't know if we're leaning away from VC as much as there are so many more options now than there were 10 years ago. And they're maturing in really interesting ways. So I'll kind of talk about the universe of CVC, which is quite interesting, and in particular thinking about the different flavors of it that I think are really impactful and are emerging rapidly. One of the previous speakers talked about this as well. I think it's a really key point that I cannot overemphasize is that every major health system I talk to is developing an accelerator. And they're developing an internal investment strategy and an internal ecosystem strategy. There's this at the true oldest ivory towers of health systems that we can all think of and know very much those brand names are having existential conversations within their boards, within their C-suites about, how do they not get out innovated? How do they become the destination for the most innovative solutions in the world and most innovative researchers in the world? And that's really, really new. And it's really, really uncomfortable for them. It's the same thing that happened to a lot of major corporations 10, 20 years ago. That digital transformation, hospital systems are really going through that now, which means that there's new capital available. And that capital comes in the form oftentimes of commercial contracts as much as it does equity investments. So that's a new trend that I think if you are building a solution that belongs in the hospital, look seriously at the hospital systems as your investors or as your first customers, obviously. All the payers are building the same accelerators. The big pharma companies are doing the same thing. When we were able to have Merck here to share that strategy as well, which is really beautiful. Their digital studio uptown, or as we are uptown, is absolutely gorgeous. If you have the opportunity to work there, it'd be very cool. There's also, you mentioned things like crowdfunding. I actually worked in crowdfunding for a long time. I developed the 4th ever registered SEC intermediary, doing Reg CF and Reg A securities. And we haven't figured that out yet. That market has not been figured out in healthcare, but I am optimistic for healthcare because it's a thing that everybody cares about and it's inherently personal. We were just talking about storytelling. We're talking about cancer. Everybody has a cancer story in their family. There's an investment opportunity there that we just really haven't unlocked yet. I tried for a while and I failed for a while. Somebody else will figure that out eventually. Venture debt is fascinating. Venture debt follows VC investment cycles. We work with all of the large venture debt players here at Mercury. We oftentimes help our customers understand what the portfolios need to look like, what the credit boxes look like for these venture debt providers. But venture debt really does follow those tier 1 brand name accelerator, or not accelerators, investors. So when those brand name investors get unlocked and they start deploying a lot of capital, venture debt will come in to follow that very often. Venture debt can be quite strategic. There are some major players who could be very, very helpful and who know very well the large acquisition paths, because that's usually how they end up getting paid. But really that follows the venture capital market. So as venture capital unlocks, venture debt will start to flow more. We're also seeing a lot of just corporate credit evolve. And by corporate credit, I mean, privately sourced credit, so non-bank capital. So really over the last 5 years, as many of the world's wealthiest families got over-deployed into venture capital, they stopped investing that capital into net new venture capital funds. They went into private equity. And in fact, a lot of those private equity funds looked like private credit. They're making much more sophisticated loans to mid-stage companies, growth stage companies. Oftentimes they can be riskier, or they can use much more creative or much broader underwriting strategies. So at Mercury, we do not do that, but we partner with many of the largest that do, and we can help our customers understand that market.
Have you seen any of the models sort of trend higher than others, or have any overtaken any of the other models that you just mentioned?
Private credit, for sure. Over the last 10 years, maybe especially in the last 2 or 3 years, that is a new source of capital, not new source of capital, but is a newly significant source of capital over the last couple of years, especially in healthcare or more capital intensive industries, healthcare especially because of the services play. venture debt very much lagged, right? When venture pulls back, venture debt pulls back. When venture accelerates, venture debt follows in behind that. And we can, again, like those trends are things we see very clearly at Mercury.
And just to round off, actually, Ben, you talked a lot about, not just being sort of just the banking platform, but also sort of being the intermediary of working, build the relationships between the investors and also the startups that you guys work with. Are there any sort of changes that are coming, or are there any changes in expectations and dynamics of the relationships between investors and startups that you're currently noticing, or that are sort of, I guess, going to change at the turn of the year?
I don't know if it's going to change at the turn of the year, but something I am seeing is founders having much stronger expectations of their investors. There's a founder who I work with quite often, who is a multi-time exited founder, across everything from film to finance to healthcare. And he talked. I was in an investor meeting with him, and he looked at his investors, and he goes, he's like, "You better watch my back. Like this is your money. You have a job too. Your job is to see trends that I don't see. It is to understand markets that I don't understand, and is to be an extra set of eyes and ears for me. You're a seed stage investor with me. Like if we succeed, we're all going to succeed in a significant way. You have a job, and I'm going to hold you accountable to doing that job." And really good investors probably all inherently naturally do that. A lot of VCs didn't, and I think over the last couple of years, there was a little bit of light shined onto the VC market, on who was doing a good job and who wasn't doing a good job, but it really servicing their portfolios. And I think founders feel more empowered to have those direct conversations with their investors, understanding that like investors have a boss too. Everybody in this world, almost everybody has a boss. And I think there was this perception of VCs live over there, or investors live over there, and they look down upon us as founders, and they money falls from the heavens, and we get to go build our dream or go save a life. That illusion, I think, has really been broken in a broader way, and you're seeing much healthier conversations between investors and founders in the partnership that they're building. And I find that to be really compelling, and I really hope that trend continues.
Yeah, no, I like how you sort of describe that evolution as we sort of get into the progress of those dynamics. So, Ben, thanks so much for spending some time with us to sort of talk to our investors and founders today about some of the trends you're seeing. And please do connect with Ben in the break time that we've got coming up, and you'll hear more from Ben later on in our challenge. So, Ben, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jerry.
I've got one quick follow-up for you.
Oh no.
Yes. So most founders are not the savviest when it comes to finance. They really have a passion for the problems they're solving, but they also can't afford a grizzled CFO. So what are the sources they go to get some best advice on this kind of journey of gathering money and spending it wisely and getting to the point of a big exit?
That's a really good question. So there's a couple of solutions we often see. One, which is a little bit more obvious, which is there are a lot of fractional CFOs, especially on the biotech side of things. There are a lot of investment CFOs who will work for very, very low fees in exchange often for equity in a solution they believe in. But their only job really is to help you organize the fundraise. That's very much a network play. You have to usually know that person or get a direct introduction to that person. If you're lucky enough to have a board, your board probably knows the answers to those questions. I recommend forming a board as soon as you can to bring those people on and to invest them in the success of your solution. Another is go find another founder. Go find a founder who is 2 or 3 stages ahead of you, who probably has that CFO and probably asked the same questions that you think are dumb questions that they didn't ask and they made the mistake, and then their CFO told them they made a dumb mistake. So finding that other founder mentor who's a couple of stages ahead, who has not only made the decisions you're making, but then gone through a cycle or two to see what the actual outcome of those decisions were, to help them understand the real success of them. So they could go into the founder, go into an investment grade CFO who will work with you fractionally, or doing fractional CFOs, go to a fractional CFO platform where you can access them, or talk to your banker. If you do have a personal connection with your banker, have that conversation with them. They oftentimes know the answers you're looking for, or know the expert who does know and can make that connection for you.